November 2025, for the first time in years, Russian state television broke from its usual defiance and admitted that the economy was under severe strain. How did the Kremlin lose control of its own narrative so suddenly? Analysts say the shift followed a string of cascading blows, Ukrainian drones striking deep into Russia's industrial core, Western sanctions closing financial arteries, and OPEC quietly flooding the market with oil to erode Moscow's leverage. It was a perfect example of what economists now call the domino effect, a single refinery fire spreading shockwaves across supply chains, budgets, and even foreign policy. Within days of the Ryazan refinery's shutdown, responsible for nearly 5% of Russia's refined output, fuel prices in several regions jumped 20%, according to independent Russian outlets like Meduza. Logistics firms reported diesel shortages, halting trains as far as Omsk and Novosibirsk. Kremlin insiders on Rossiya 1 lamented the budgetary hemorrhage. One host dared to say aloud what few officials had risked. War is costly, and we are systematically being drained. Reuters confirmed that at least one-third of Russia's oil refining capacity has been disrupted since mid-2024, largely due to precision strikes that Kyiv calls energy decapitation attacks. Each drone impact is small in isolation, but together they fracture the machinery sustaining Putin's war. The opportunity cost of these losses is staggering. Instead of investing in domestic reconstruction or energy diversification, Moscow must divert funds to rebuild refineries repeatedly hit. Defense News reports that replacement components are now sourced through covert intermediaries in Central Asia, costing up to 40% more due to sanctions. Meanwhile, thousands of skilled technicians have been reassigned from civilian energy plants to military logistics, leaving production gaps. Every ruble spent patching pipelines is a ruble not spent on stabilizing the economy. Even Kremlin commentators admit morale inside major state-owned enterprises is deteriorating. Western intelligence leaks to DW suggest some managers are falsifying output data to mask the severity of shortages, a scenario reminiscent of late Soviet collapse metrics. If these trends continue through winter, the government may face what economists call a reverse bottleneck: too much crude, but too little refining capacity to process it. In essence, Russia is drowning in its own unprocessed oil. From a strategic contrast perspective, the irony is glaring. Putin launched his special military operation partly to secure energy dominance over Europe. Yet 3 years later, he presides over a shrinking oil economy reliant on Middle Eastern goodwill and Chinese discounts. A goal born of control has produced chaos. How long can an autocracy project strength abroad while its television hosts whisper of bankruptcy at home? And if even Kremlin TV concedes defeat, what comes next for Russia's economic war machine? Meanwhile, Ukrainian drones prepared their next strike, this time targeting another facility, critical to Moscow's illusion of stability. Just 2 days later, in the gray dawn over Ryazan, smoke rose again, this time from what locals described as a deafening chain of explosions. Could one refinery fire really reshape Russia's entire energy posture? The answer, according to analysts from Al Jazeera and Defense News, is yes, because this refinery was a linchpin, not just a plant. The Ryazan facility, producing nearly 5% of all refined Russian fuels, had already been targeted 4 times since early 2024. Each attack forced shutdowns, costly repairs, and critical diversions of manpower. This single strike turned into a domino effect across the national supply grid. Fuel trucks stalled, export schedules collapsed, and several regional airports rationed aviation fuel. What looked like one localized incident now rippled through trade networks stretching from Murmansk to Vladivostok. Ukrainian intelligence sources cited by BBC News said the drones were low-cost, high-impact FPV models guided by AI mapping software evidence of how Kiev's engineers are now matching ingenuity to attrition. Western experts call this precision attrition warfare, using small, smart weapons to create large-scale economic paralysis. For every $20,000 drone Ukraine launches, noted British analyst Samuel Crane in The Guardian, Russia loses millions in repair costs and export revenue. Here the opportunity cost multiplies. Every refinery Russia must rebuild means fewer rubles for pensions, fewer shipments of spare parts to the front, and fewer subsidies to appease restless regional governors. Putin's finance ministry, once boasting of resilience, is now quietly issuing domestic war bonds at record interest rates. The irony, said DW's Moscow bureau, is that Russia is financing its war effort by cannibalizing its own economy. Strategically, the attack also exposes a deeper contrast between Moscow's global ambitions and its technological vulnerability. The Kremlin had promised to create a self-reliant energy superpower immune to Western interference. Yet the Ryazan strike showed that the empire's industrial heart can be pierced by drones launched from hundreds of miles away, many assembled from commercial components. In an economy built on central control, decentralization of destruction has become Ukraine's most potent weapon. Inside, Russia discontent simmers. Independent outlet. The Bell reported panic buying of fuel and a surge in social media censorship. Even pro-government influencers have begun pleading for temporary truces to protect infrastructure. But in Kiev, the calculus is simple. Every refinery burning means fewer missiles raining on Ukrainian cities. The United States, under President Trump, has so far refrained from direct involvement, focusing instead on tightening sanctions and supplying intelligence. But Washington insiders told Reuters that NATO planners view these refinery strikes as strategic leverage multipliers, a way to collapse Moscow's logistics without triggering open confrontation. Could the next domino be Russia's export terminals on the Black Sea or Baltic coast? As winter sets in and crude stockpiles swell, the Kremlin faces a choice between selling at loss or shutting production wells entirely, both devastating outcomes. Yet, as the smoke over Ryazan fades, Western observers warn the real impact is still to come, when sanctions collide with these battlefield losses to form an economic chokehold unseen since the Cold War. By mid-November 2025, the true scale of Russia's oil dilemma became impossible to hide. Export data leaked to Reuters showed a 28% drop in shipments since the latest wave of U.S. sanctions. How could a nation that once boasted energy invincibility be cornered this quickly? The answer lies in the domino effect of simultaneous crises, drones, sanctions, and market betrayal. When the Trump administration announced new restrictions on Russia's two largest oil firms, Rosneft and Lukoil, foreign insurers immediately withdrew coverage for tankers carrying Russian crude. Within 72 hours, dozens of vessels anchored idle near Novorossiysk, unable to deliver cargoes to India and Turkey. Meanwhile, OPEC's quiet decision to raise output erased what little pricing advantage Moscow hoped for. In pure numbers, oil prices rose only $4 a barrel, far short of the spike Putin had publicly predicted. The opportunity cost of this squeeze is colossal. Moscow can no longer balance war spending with falling oil revenue. The central bank, forced to stabilize the ruble, burned through nearly $30 billion in reserves between August and October, according to Bloomberg estimates. Western economists now describe Russia's economy as cash-rich but liquidity-starved, plenty of raw oil, yet nowhere safe to sell it. Every dollar lost to discounted crude is a missile that cannot be built, a pension unpaid, a governor left begging for federal aid. In this crisis, Putin gambled on an old trick, exporting raw crude instead of refined fuel. But that move backfired spectacularly. BBC News confirmed that new U.S. Treasury guidelines now penalize any intermediary trading Russian crude above $60 a barrel, effectively freezing the shadow fleet. To bypass this, the Kremlin offered secret rebates to India and China, cutting profits even further. Energy analysts from Al Jazeera note that Russian exports are now a race to the bottom, selling more for less faster than ever. Here, the strategic contrast becomes painfully clear. Putin's strategy of energy weaponization, using oil as political leverage, is now turned against him. The very states he once sought to dominate are undercutting his revenues. OPEC's increase undermined Moscow's illusion of scarcity. Meanwhile, American shale producers quietly filled the gap, boosting U.S. exports to record levels. In essence, Putin's quest to punish the West has strengthened it. Inside NATO, this shift is viewed as a turning point. A Pentagon brief leaked to Defense News described Russia's oil collapse as the single largest non-military victory of the conflict. Officials argue that starving Moscow's economy achieves what tanks cannot, forcing strategic retreat through financial exhaustion. Still, Russia refuses to fold. The Kremlin is courting Gulf investors, promising post-sanctions partnerships. Yet Western diplomats scoff at these gestures. It's like refinancing a sinking ship, one EU envoy told DW, as energy markets adjust. The Kremlin's next move could determine whether the ruble stabilizes or collapses completely. Will Putin double down on confrontation or reach for diplomacy to save what's left of his economy? What followed next shocked analysts as Moscow quietly dispatched one of its most influential envoys to Washington, a move that revealed just how desperate the situation had become. In late November 2025, Russian diplomatic circles buzzed with disbelief. Kirill Dmitriev, head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, and one of Putin's most trusted economic envoys, had quietly landed in Washington. What would drive a Kremlin insider to cross the ocean during peak sanctions pressure? According to Reuters, Dmitriev's visit was unofficial, but its purpose was unmistakable: to explore an off-ramp from financial isolation. Inside sources in the New York Times confirmed that he met privately with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to discuss temporary relief on oil export restrictions. In other words, Moscow was pleading for a pause. This diplomatic scramble signaled a striking domino effect: the economic collapse at home now forcing political concessions abroad. For the Kremlin, the opportunity cost of such outreach was enormous. Every hour spent negotiating in Washington risked signaling weakness to hardliners in Moscow. Yet doing nothing meant risking a full-scale economic meltdown before year's end. Western analysts described this as Putin's Rubicon moment: either swallow pride or watch the budget implode. State media tried to spin Dmitriev's mission as a routine consultation. But Russian talk shows, once fiercely loyal, hinted at panic. "If we are strong," one commentator on Rossiya 24 asked, "why are we begging the Americans?" The question reverberated through social media until censors abruptly shut down comment threads. Al Jazeera reported that NATO capitals were closely tracking the trip. A senior European diplomat called it the clearest admission yet that sanctions are biting where missiles cannot. Meanwhile, Washington insiders described the Trump administration's stance as calm but firm. Trump reportedly told aides that any sanction relief would depend on verifiable de-escalation, emphasizing that the U.S. won't reward aggression with leniency. This is where the strategic contrast comes into focus. For years, Moscow portrayed itself as the center of a new multipolar order immune to Western leverage. Yet here was Putin's economic architect seeking American permission to keep his oil afloat. The image of Russian dominance, carefully cultivated through propaganda, now collided with the reality of dependence. According to Defense News, U.S. intelligence agencies have interpreted Russia's sudden outreach as a sign of internal fragmentation. Several oligarchs are reportedly lobbying for a ceasefire to protect their businesses. At the same time, military hawks within the Kremlin urge escalation to avoid appearing weak. They're trapped between humiliation and collapse, said Dr. Helen Martins, an energy security expert at the London School of Economics. This diplomatic overture also exposed a domino-within-domino scenario. Every sanction triggers an internal debate. Every debate erodes elite unity. The resulting uncertainty, analysts say, weakens Putin more than any drone strike could. And while Washington listened politely, it offered no public concessions. Instead, Trump hinted at an expanded sanctions package targeting Russia's shadow fleet and financial intermediaries. Pressure works, one senior advisor told Bloomberg. Every day of negotiation costs them another billion. Will Moscow's attempt at quiet diplomacy buy time, or accelerate its decline by admitting vulnerability? Meanwhile, as Dmitriev returned home to brief the Kremlin state media, unleashed a new propaganda wave, blaming Ukraine and NATO for sabotaging peace, setting the stage for Russia's next rhetorical pivot. Back in Moscow, the tone of Kremlin broadcasts hardened overnight. Instead of discussing sanctions or refinery losses, anchors began accusing Ukraine, and by extension NATO, of blocking peace. Kyiv drags out negotiations at the West's request, declared a state host on Rossiya 1, echoing talking points that have defined Russian disinformation since 2022. But behind the fiery rhetoric was desperation. Could propaganda really mask a collapsing economy? This was the clearest illustration yet of the strategic contrast. While the Kremlin claimed to be fighting for peace and sovereignty, its actions suppressing dissent, rationing fuel, freezing industrial wages betrayed the opposite. The contrast between narrative and reality grew too wide to conceal. According to BBC News, internal memos from Russia's Ministry of Energy admitted that refinery output had fallen by more than 30% compared to pre-war levels. They are running on fumes, both literally and politically, one Western diplomat told DW. Here, the domino effect resurfaces, this time in the political sphere. Each economic failure triggers new waves of censorship, which in turn deepen public mistrust. Recent polling by Levada Center, a rare independent institution still operating in Russia, shows approval ratings for local governors dropping sharply, particularly in regions where fuel shortages have caused blackouts. The Kremlin's effort to centralize control has paradoxically accelerated fragmentation, as regional leaders quietly lobby for emergency autonomy to stabilize their own economies. Meanwhile, Western intelligence sees opportunity in Moscow's internal rift. Russia's war machine is no longer cohesive, said military analyst Martin Dean in Defense News. They're fighting a war abroad and an economic insurgency at home. This internal strain also amplifies the opportunity cost of continued aggression. Every week that Russia prolongs the conflict, it forfeits billions in trade, investor confidence, and global influence, all to maintain symbolic control over occupied territories. In Washington, President Trump's administration views the situation as a test of endurance. The U.S. has quietly coordinated with NATO allies to expand surveillance of Russia's so-called shadow fleet, cutting off maritime insurance routes through Turkey and Greece. European ports have begun turning away tankers suspected of carrying disguised Russian crude. According to Reuters, this coordinated enforcement has removed an estimated 1.2 million barrels per day from circulation, tightening the noose around the Kremlin's budget. And yet Moscow persists in its narrative that Ukraine refuses peace. We are ready to negotiate, said Dmitriev upon returning from Washington, but the West orders Kyiv to keep fighting. The irony is striking. While Russia publicly demands talks, it privately rejects every ceasefire proposal that doesn't include Ukrainian surrender. As Al Jazeera noted, Russia is asking for peace on its own terms, which means victory. The propaganda machine, however, faces diminishing returns. Even on Russian social media, state-approved hashtags are being drowned out by complaints about fuel prices and layoffs. When citizens begin to question official truths, even the most sophisticated censorship network falters. Will the Kremlin double down on its narrative of victimhood, or will the weight of economic reality finally break through its echo chamber? What followed next in the final days of November revealed that Russia's crisis was no longer just economic or political. It had become moral, forcing the world to recall one of history's most haunting warnings. By early December 2025, as the ruble wobbled and refinery fires dimmed the skyline, even Russian commentators invoked a sense of historic inevitability. "We're reliving the decay of empires," said one former Kremlin advisor in exile. Could this be the moment when Putin's system finally confronts its limits? The answer echoed through Western media. Reuters reported that long fuel lines stretched from Kaluga to Khabarovsk, with rationing spreading to civilian transport networks. In a televised address, Putin vowed that Russia will overcome its trials, yet his words sounded eerily similar to those of late Soviet leaders before collapse. The domino effect was now irreversible. Each refinery crippled by drones triggered shortages that cascaded into agriculture, construction, and consumer goods. The country's once mighty petro-economy had turned fragile, reliant on emergency imports from China and Iran. This crisis also revealed the final opportunity cost of war. Every resource funneled into the front line, from engineers to spare parts, deprived domestic industries of vitality. According to The Guardian, Russia's civil aviation sector has grounded over 30% of its fleet due to lack of parts. In energy drilling projects in Siberia stand idle as funds vanish into military repair budgets. Economists from DW calculate that each month of war now costs Moscow $15 billion in lost productivity, more than double the rate seen in 2023. They're burning their future to sustain a narrative, concluded German analyst Clara Voigt. Against this backdrop, President Trump addressed NATO's Winter Summit, praising Allied resilience and urging a strategic patience policy. His administration's forecast predicts that Russia's export earnings could drop another 20% by spring 2026 if OPEC and Western sanctions maintain current trajectories. Inside Brussels, officials describe this as a quiet victory, one achieved without direct confrontation. Here lies the stark strategic contrast. Putin's vision of a resurgent Russia has produced isolation. His campaign to defend sovereignty has surrendered economic independence to foreign buyers. The once proud energy giant now survives on barter deals and black market logistics. The symbolism is striking: a nation built on oil now begging for spare fuel pumps. And yet history has a way of repeating itself. As Western commentators recalled Ronald Reagan's 1983 speech on appeasement, the message felt timeless: peace without principle is surrender. Reagan's words resurfaced across US and European broadcasts, not as Cold War nostalgia, but as moral context for a modern autocracy running out of excuses. The moral reckoning, more than the economic one, may be what breaks the Kremlin's will. When even state anchors lower their voices to speak of sacrifice fatigue, a regime's grip begins to slip. Russia's downfall, it seems, may not arrive through revolution or invasion, but through exhaustion, one refinery and one lie at a time. Yet as winter deepens, a haunting question remains: can an empire built on control endure when its own people stop believing the story?